Quick question before we get into anything else. What if the biggest twist in this entire show already happened, and you watched it happen, and you had no idea? Go back to the season 2 premiere. Boyd is stuck underground, bleeding, cornered, completely out of move. And then a rope drops down out of nowhere. No explanation, no follow-up. Just a rope and a way out. For 2 full seasons, that was a mystery we all shrugged off. This town does horrible things constantly, so one small unexplained kindness barely registered. It felt like set dressing. Then season 3 happened, and that rope stopped being set dressing. It became a crime scene because someone threw it on purpose. And that someone was a teenage girl who, at the point we originally watched that scene, hadn't even developed the ability yet. That's Julie. And once you sit with what that actually means, the show quietly told us something enormous. Some of what we've already watched was never random. It was already finished before we saw it. So today I want to make a case that I don't think gets talked about enough. Julie is not this show's chosen one. The chosen one label gets thrown around a lot in genre television, and I get why people reach for it. But I think it's the wrong box for her. I think she's something stranger, and honestly, a lot more dangerous to the thing running this town. I think Julie is this show's historian, and I think that job description is exactly what season 5 is going to be built around. Let's get into it. Before we dig into theory, let's talk about what's actually confirmed, because there's real news here, and it changes how we should be reading everything that follows. MGM Plus has officially locked in season 5, and it's the final one. This wasn't a cancellation dressed up as an ending. According to the people running the show, 5 seasons was the plan from the start, and they're getting the chance to close it out on their own term. Production is expected to kick off this summer up in Halifax, with a release targeted for 2027. The showrunner has also gone on record with something worth remembering while we talk about Julie today. He's worked on some of the biggest mythology-driven shows of the last 20 years. The kind of shows built entirely on long game reveals. And his stated philosophy for this kind of storytelling is simple. You get an audience to fall in love with characters, and then you make them watch those characters suffer for it. Keep that in your head, because everything we're about to walk through, the loops, the sacrifices, the girl who keeps getting sent back into fire, fits that philosophy perfectly. This isn't a show that hands out mercy. It's a show that studies pain closely enough to know exactly where to apply it next. So, with a confirmed final season, a crew that's explicitly building toward closure instead of another cliffhanger, and a creative team that's already told us their whole approach is character suffering with a payoff, Julie's arc suddenly reads less like a subplot and more like the engine for the entire ending. Let's lock down the facts first, because there's more solid ground here than people give the show credit for. Julie's ability shows up in season 3. She heads back into the ruins in the woods, and time just stops cooperating with her. She witnesses her own past trauma play out again. The ordeal from the end of season 2, herself and the others being tormented. From there, she's pulled straight into that same season 2 premiere, and she's the one who drops the rope to Boyd. The loop closes right in front of us. She always did it. We just didn't know it yet when we first watched. Before she's yanked back out, she also lands somewhere else entirely. The night 2 other residents made their escape through the tunnels, and the last thing she hears before getting pulled out is children crying in a language most of the adults in this town don't understand. Then comes a diner scene that I'd argue quietly sets up the entire rulebook for this ability. Julie tells her younger brother what happened to her, and her brother, a kid who spent the whole show obsessed with story structure and folklore, doesn't panic. He names it. He calls her a story walker, someone who can visit chapters of a story that have already happened. And then he lays down the rule that the rest of the show is built on. You can visit. You cannot rewrite. That's not fan speculation, that's dialogue. And the show proves it almost immediately, because the season 3 finale drops us into a version of Julie we've never met. Shorter hair, scratches across her face. She shows up in the woods with her father already knowing what's coming, and she tries to stop it anyway. She fails. She watches it happen exactly the way it was always going to happen. Here's where I want to slow down, because there's a detail in that scene that I think gets skipped past too quickly. When present-day Julie story walks, what actually travels is closer to her awareness. She's inside the memory, watching, present but not fully physical, and another character can literally grab her real body and pull her back out because her body never left in the first place. The Julie in the woods during that finale is not doing that. She's solid. She touches her father. She talks, and he responds back to her like she's really there. That is a completely different tier of this power, and the show has never once stopped to explain the jump between the two. In a series this careful about its own internal rules, that's not sloppiness. That's a breadcrumb. Whatever future Julie has figured out is a far more advanced version of story walking than anything we've seen her manage in real time. And I don't think the gap between those two versions is measured in years. I think it's measured in repetition. The easy assumption is that she's simply from further ahead on the timeline. Some distant future point after everything's already fallen apart. I don't buy that. My read is that she's from the tail end of season 5 itself, and by the time we glimpse her, she has been story walking for what feels, from inside her own head, like an unbearably long stretch of time. Cycle after cycle, escape after failed escape. While everyone else in this town is living through a handful of brutal weeks, Julie might be racking up something closer to centuries of lived experience. That's my explanation for the scratches, for the exhaustion on her face in that scene. Not distance traveled. Mileage accumulated. Season 4 is where this ability finally gets some real mechanics, and then, weirdly, almost disappeared. Early in the season, Julie tries to force her power to take her exactly where she wants to go. The method comes straight out of her brother's research. You leave a bookmark, an object tied to a specific place and moment, so you have an anchor to travel to and a way back. She builds one aimed at the night her father died, because of course she does. That's the entire shape of her grief in one sentence. If she can just get the mechanics right, she believes she can undo the one moment that broke her. It doesn't work the way she wants. Instead, she's thrown into something far worse. The original massacre. The slaughter one of the show's longest surviving residents lived through as a child. She watches the entity behind it feeding on the dead, and then it notices her. It's a pride. Whatever this thing is, however long it's been running this town, a girl from a future point in the timeline standing inside its oldest atrocity was not something it expected. From its side of the story, that's the first time they've ever met. After that encounter, the ability basically vanishes from the back half of the season. The finale barely touches it. A lot of viewers were frustrated, and honestly, fair enough. Season 3's finale sold this power as the engine for everything going forward, and then the show spent most of a season quietly parking it in a drawer. But here's my take. A show this deliberate doesn't just forget its biggest weapon a season away from the finish line. I think that's inventory. I think story walking was always meant to be the final season mechanism, and Season 4's real job was just to teach the audience the rules before the real test. Look at where the Season 4 finale actually leaves everyone, because this is the strongest argument for Julie's importance. The residents finally recover a set of ancient remains buried beneath the town's cursed tree, at a massive cost. And the belief that recovering them would finally offer protection turns out to be false. As the entity itself puts it, they found a key, but not the lock that fits it. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, something wearing a familiar face goes house to house and strips out every protective object the residents have. Every last one. Fed into the same tree. Gone in a single afternoon. The one reliable shield this town has ever had, removed completely. And heading into Season 5, nobody living there even knows it's happened yet. And then there's the final scene of the season, which confirms something the show has only ever hinted at. The two competing entities behind this town's horror, the one in yellow and the one in white, know each other. The people making the show have said directly that this scene exists to establish history between them. That's the stated goal, not the details, just the fact that a history exists. So let's hold that carefully, because even held loosely, it reframes the entire show. This isn't just a trap. It's a very old dispute between two forces, and every resident is trapped inside somebody else's unfinished argument. Notice the imbalance in how each of them ends the season too. One is escalating. Defenses down, moving freely among people who have no idea how exposed they now are. The other ends the season hopeful, genuinely believing this cycle might finally break now that the remains are recovered. One of them is operating on certainty. The other is operating on faith, and the residents are about to find out the hard way which one actually understood the situation correctly. There's a funeral coming, and in this town, funerals happen after dark. The first night someone reaches for protection that isn't there anymore, that's a scene Season 5 has already written for itself. So here's the situation heading in. A key with no lock. A town with no shield. A conflict older than every character we've met. And exactly one person who has the ability to go find out what any of it actually means. I want to be upfront about the question I genuinely can't answer. because you're probably already asking it. Why Julie specifically? Why does this power land on her and nobody else? The show has given us almost nothing here, and I'm not gonna pretend otherwise. The one real thread worth pulling is another character who is chained alongside her and a third victim during that original ordeal. He feels something at those ruins too. He's the one who can pull her back to reality when she needs an anchor. So whatever that place responds to, Julie might not be one of a kind. She might just be further along than anyone else who's been exposed to it. That's genuinely all we've got, and I'd rather flag the gap honestly than pretend I have it solved. This show has a track record of sitting on origin stories longer than almost anything else, so the silence itself might be telling us something. Here's the actual argument. Think about how every single attempt to beat this town has worked so far. One character fights it, organizes people, defends, survives. Another remembers it, carrying visions and fragments from lives she's lived before. A third decodes it, working through symbols and numbers trying to find the system underneath. Go back further, into cycles we've only caught glimpses of, and you get the same three approaches over and over. Someone remembered, someone decodes, someone endured. Every single one of those strategies has one thing in common. They're all trapped inside a single chapter of the story. They're all present tense. And every present tense strategy this town has ever faced has eventually failed. Julie breaks that pattern completely. She's the first person who doesn't have to fight this thing from inside one moment in time. She can stand inside a childhood that happened decades ago. She can stand inside somebody's final days. She can carry what she learns in one chapter forward into the next. Everybody else gets one chapter of the book. Julie gets to read the whole thing. That's the real job. Not a warrior, not a destined hero. A witness with total access to a history nobody else can reach. And for what it's worth, the actor playing her has said in interviews that her own hope for the ending is basically this exact idea. Julie traveling back to earlier versions of this cycle, gathering what those people knew and why they didn't make it, and bringing that knowledge home. That's not a leak. That's just an actor describing the shape of the character she spent years playing. But when the person living inside this role independently lands on the same read I'm making, that tells me something about the direction, even if the specifics are still unknown. She's not doing any of this alone either, because the show has already quietly built her partner for this. Her younger brother has been talking about this town in terms of story structure since episode 1, and his track record is almost flawless. He's the one who named her ability. He's the one who laid down the no changing the past rule before the finale ever proved it true. And the actual working mechanics of her power, the bookmark method, came directly out of his research. The framework the adults in this show keep treating like a kid's coping mechanism has now produced testable results twice. So here's how I'd frame the partnership. He understands the shape of the story. She's the only one who can physically stand inside it. He's the theorist. She's the fieldwork. Two people solving the same puzzle from opposite ends, and I don't think it's a coincidence that they're siblings. Once you accept that the past can't be rewritten because it's already finished, a few strange objects in this show start looking less like magic and more like leftover evidence. There's a children's book that circulates through this story, and there's a reading of it that's hard to shake once you notice it. What if someone eventually gets far enough into this town's history, or reaches the true end of the story, and writes down what they learned inside a children's tale? That book then finds its way back into circulation, carried by a family with no idea what they're actually holding, so that a curious kid can end up reading the rules of the trap from inside a bedtime story. An object with no real point of origin, existing only because the timeline loops back on itself. There's also a ring that shows up carrying a symbol shaped like an infinity loop. I want to be completely clear that this section is theory. Nothing on screen confirms where that book actually comes from. But a show built entirely around closed time loops choosing to hide an infinity symbol inside a wedding ring is the kind of detail this production doesn't include by accident. Which brings us to a real question. Why does the entity running this town's horror suddenly care about a teenager? Because it does. That's not a guess. It was clearly aware of a future version of Julie standing in the woods the night it killed her father. It saw her inside its own oldest atrocity, and it reacted with genuine surprise, possibly the only time we've ever seen it caught off guard. And in the finale, it escalates from simply managing the town to open aggression, stripping every defense the residents have the exact moment they get their hands on those recovered remains. My read, and I'm flagging this clearly as my own theory, is that it isn't worried about Julie because she's powerful in a fighting sense. Plenty of characters are stronger than her physically, and none of them have ever truly rattled it. It's worried about her because she's dangerous in a way nothing else in this town is. Every story walker, given enough time, eventually walks all the way back to the very beginning. And the beginning is the one chapter this entity absolutely cannot afford for anyone to actually see. It can't stop her from walking. If it could, I suspect she'd already be gone. What it can do is exactly what it's always done to everyone else in this town. Control the terrain, poison what she finds, make sure the historian comes home carrying the wrong version of history. And that final scene with the two entities raises the stakes even further because if they genuinely have history together, that history exists somewhere on the timeline already. Which means, in theory, it's a chapter Julie could actually go watch. Now we're stepping fully into prediction, so weigh everything from here accordingly. I think she ends up inside the story of the boy who survived that original massacre as a child. Not the adult version we know, the child. There's a small but real anchor for this because when Julie first story walked, she landed on the exact night of an escape through the tunnels and heard his voice and another resident's voice before being pulled out. She's already been adjacent to his history once without meaning to be, and his entire life has a Julie-shaped gap in it. He survived something unthinkable, alone, for years, and he trusted her faster than he trusts almost anyone else in this show. My favorite version of Season 5 is one where we finally learn why. A scarred girl from a chapter that hadn't happened yet sat with a traumatized kid in the dark, comforted him, maybe told him to keep drawing to cope. He wouldn't remember it clearly. Trauma tends to erase things like that, but some part of him would still recognize her the moment they actually met. I also think she ends up inside the story of the town's most feared former resident. The one everyone talks about, but nobody's story we've actually seen from the inside. Every detail we have about him arrives secondhand, fragments, fear, a change that came over him that nobody can fully explain. If Julie walks into his actual chapter, I don't think she finds a monster. I think she finds someone who got closer to the truth than anyone before or since, and paid for it. And I think the official version of his story, the one where he's simply the villain, might be exactly the version the entity running this town needs everyone to keep believing. That's speculation stacked on more speculation, but a show's real history being rewritten by its own antagonist is precisely the kind of lie a historian exists to expose. And finally, I think she reaches the actual beginning. The original sacrifice, who performed it, why this particular language and these particular souls keep resurfacing generation after generation. For years, characters in this show have been told the answers live at the beginning, and for just as long, that's been a dead end because nobody could physically go there. That stopped being true the moment Julie developed this ability. Here's the one I'm most confident about, and it deserves its own moment. I don't think Season 5 only sends Julie into brand new chapters of this story. I think it sends her back into scenes we've already watched. 4 seasons of this show are full of half-glimpse figures, shapes at the tree line, presences and visions, in dreams, in the corners of other characters' memories and hallucinations. Some of that is almost certainly just the town's general background dread, unrelated static. But the rope taught us something important. This show is completely willing to plant Julie inside a scene years before it ever tells us she was actually there. It's done that once, cleanly, on screen. I think the final season does it again, at scale. I think we get familiar moments replayed from a different angle, and a figure we assumed was just another ghost resolves into a girl with short hair and scratches on her face, standing exactly where she was always standing. Not changing those moments, completing them. If that's where this is headed, it means Julie hasn't just been building toward importance. It means she's already been load-bearing in episodes that aired before her ability even existed on screen. And the finale becomes partly an act of rereading everything that came before it. So that's the whole thesis, and here's where I think it lands. If Season 5 really is built around Julie, I don't think it ends with her defeating a monster in any traditional sense. The creatures in this show were never really the disease. They're symptoms. The cycle hasn't survived this long because nobody fought hard enough. One character has fought as hard as a person possibly can for 4 straight seasons, and the town has absorbed every bit of it without breaking. The cycle survives because the knowledge never survives intact. Every cycle, it gets scattered. One person holds a piece, another holds a different piece. Someone else takes their piece to the grave. And the town wins every single time by making absolutely sure no single mind ever holds the complete picture at once. Julie is the first person who could actually hold all of it at the same time. Not because she's stronger than everyone who came before her and failed. Just because she's the first one who got to watch every one of them fail and carry the full weight of what they learned back home with her. Her brother has spent this entire show insisting that stories follow rules. And I think the simplest rule might also be the last one this show needs to prove. A story only actually ends when somebody finally finishes reading it. This town has outlasted every fighter, every rememberer, every decoder it's ever trapped inside its borders. What it has never had to face is its own reader. It just doesn't know that yet. If you think I'm reaching on any part of this, or if you've got a theory about who Julie actually finds when she walks, drop it in the comments. I read every single one of them before the next video goes up. And if this kind of deep dive is your thing, get subscribed, because there's a lot more of this coming before Season 5 actually airs. See you in the next one.